Hi, I'm Ian Abernethy and you're listening to Tim Smith on the Kung Fu Podcast. If you're a listener to this podcast, it's safe to say that you have an interest in the modern day practice of the traditional martial arts. Therefore, you may enjoy my own podcast, the imaginatively titled Ian Abernethy Podcast. You can find it in all the usual places and at ianabernethy.com. That's IAINABERNETHY.com.
Exploring the culture, the adventure, and the impact of martial arts. That's what Kung Fu Podcast is all about, and I'm your host, T.W. Smith. In today's episode, we're going to be getting deeper insights into the world of martial arts from friend of the program, agent of action, Jamie Clubb. I believe you'll find some real value in this particular program, particularly as Jamie explains his teaching environment. How does he work now in what he describes as his third phase? What does he enjoy just as much as martial arts? And how does that support and propagate his martial arts message? We're going to discuss as martial artists, why is it so important to extend your knowledge beyond the boundaries of just simply martial arts? We're going to try to corral a definition for martial arts today as an exercise. So get yourself ready and join me as I talk with Mr. Jamie Clubb.
I have a few things here that I wanted to run by you. First is lay a backdrop here. So for those folks who are listening, this is Sunday. It's about 1 o'clock here in Carolina time and 6 p.m. in UK time. That's where you're at, right? What part? Where are you at right now?
A place called Heathrop, which is a tiny village on out in the sticks, just outside of a place called Chipping Norton, which is in a place called Oxfordshire, which is sort of south central of England in the UK.
Hey, well, one of those sounded like one of the places I heard about in The Last Kingdom. That Netflix.
Yeah, it is like that. Are you a Bernard Cornwell fan as well? Are you?
Well. I recently found out, my family is one of the, I'm called a son of the revolution. Basically, one of my sixth, seventh generations back, great-grandparents was from Wessex and fought and left and fought with George Washington here during the Revolutionary War. I've actually had to get all my stuff lined up to be recognized in that system genealogy. But anyway, that was an interesting find. So it made the watching The Last Kingdom a little bit more interesting to me.
Yeah, absolutely. It's a totally different perspective it gives you.
Yes, absolutely. But first, Sundays here at my martial arts facility is one of my busiest days. I started my first lesson starts around 6:30 a.m. Actually, I will have one more lesson after you and I have a conversation. And it is pretty much back-to-back lessons from 6:30 till about 3. It just kind of developed that way over the years being here. And so I was in between lessons, and that's part of the reasons why I had to go mobile, because I still have some folks downstairs doing some training. Do you have like a brick and mortar school? Do you I see all these things. Are you primarily on the road teaching, going to different facilities? How do you teach now?
It's quite an unusual one to be fair. I mean, I don't run a regular club anymore. I did for years. I've done it. I've had several different periods when I've had a career as a martial arts teacher, and this is probably. If you really have to sort of categorize it, I would be my third phase. And my third phase is teaching what I like to teach to private clients. So they're either one-to-one or small groups or seminars and workshops, facilitating either people in the in the corporate or security sector or martial arts clubs in most cases. So I don't run a regular class anymore. When I say we want to talk about bricks and mortar, I do have one or two crazy clients who decide they want to come and train back at my home. now, because usually I go out to their house. Yeah, exactly. Yeah. And I say to them, it's rough. And they're going, yeah, sure. And they've got images of Rocky IV and all this sort of thing going through their head. And they turn up and they go, yes.
Okay.
You weren't joking. You weren't kidding, were you? I say it's a stable, and it is. It's a gutted stable. It's a stable that used to have horses in them, and it doesn't have any more. And and we're in one of those at the moment, and that's what I teach the students who it doesn't suit them for me to come to their house, or it doesn't suit them to book out a venue for us to train in. They come and train back in here, because that's and that all came from, funnily enough, one of my earlier private clients, when I moved out of teaching a regular club, one of my earlier private clients said, well, I've got no room for you to teach me back here, and I can't afford to rent out a venue. Therefore, I'd like to come and train with you over where you do. What do you do with your own training? I'm going, well, what do I do with my own training? And that really was like turning it back onto me. And I was going, well, I really had to sort of adapt. I live on a zoo, an actual zoo, a private zoo that trains and supplies animals to the film industry. So my parents run. So my house was built. And I'd always trained in barns and, working around other people, if you know what I mean. I'd be in I've got even now, and I've got a place where my weights and my bags hung up, and then the other half of the place is a workshop. It's just used as a workshop, and that's where I do my own sort of like personal training. And then, and so I brought them there, and I train them out. And otherwise, I'm training outside. I do a lot of outside training, just through necessity, not necessarily, not through choice, I have to say. I mean, I know you enjoy your outdoor training, but I kind of just did it just because I had no other choice, if you know what I mean.
Right.
And I braced it, and then this space came up in one of the stables, and I claimed it, and they turn up there and train there. We put the mats down, but it's as rough and ready as you can imagine it. That kind of environment. In the future, I'd love to build my own little private gym back here, just completely allocated for teaching clients and also my own personal training. But it's kind of just adapting around barns and a stable back here, and then the rest of the time I'm training at clients' houses most of the time. So about 80% of my stuff is training at people's places.
So now that description, first of all, if you're a martial arts instructor, what you just heard Jamie describe was the ability to stay flexible. If it's something that you're planning to do part-time, full-time, getting a brick and mortar facility is not the only way to go about it. And, when I first began, I trained literally outside, because that's where that's how we were taught. The 75 to 85% of my training was taught outside, and that was mostly because that's where the Army guys like to practice anyway. Getting inside every now and then was really nice, and I have to blend it up and get outside some, stay inside some, so I keep a realistic point of view, because one thing about going outside, when you have to, for example, keep your feet out there because there's fire ants and sand spurs, it makes a difference, right? There's no getting on the ground and staying there. That's awesome. Now, do you do this with your martial arts training as you described it? I'm envisioning 20 hours a week, 30 hours a week, kind of. Are you still working the zoo a little part time as well?
Yeah, I mean, I'm it's my parents' business. I work in the office at the zoo.
Okay.
I mean, I've done. I've worked actually hands-on in the zoo, of course. I mean, when you're growing up, and sort of like when we changed from being on the traveling circus, and then we built the zoo here, and you kind of you have to do that. And there was a time when I was working half in the actual zoo itself, and also in the office. These days, I'm just in the office, and I'm jumping between the work in the office with doing my own business with the martial arts, obviously, and then of course I've got my family life as well. So it's like
sure.
So a bit of a juggling act.
One of the aspects too that I noticed that you really admire you with is your writing. First, your blogs are always great. I try to catch them whenever I see them scroll through on my Twitter feed or on the Facebook, and I really enjoy. You spend a good part of your ability to communicate is well done through the writing. Is that something that you took classes in, or is it something you just kind of kept crafting until you felt comfortable with it?
I love writing. I won't make any bones about it. I mean, I love writing as much as I love martial arts. It's something I've always been keen on. I'm a big reader, and I'm an omnivorous reader. I read a variety of different subjects, fiction, non-fiction. I've always liked it. I've always thought it's an area that. I'm not skilled in many things, but writing is one of the things that I just enjoy doing the most, and it's one of the things I really like to use as a communication device. I love writing an article, I love writing an essay, I love writing a book, but my most regular blogs that you'll see on the website are lesson reports, and that came from. I started doing that around about 2003, before I was even teaching the Club Chimera brand, which is my brand, my own brand. And all I was doing there was I was just writing down everything I was doing. I was training, and I became quite obsessive about doing that every day. Whenever I was training, no matter how small, no matter how big. So if I went to a class, and of course, I've done a lot of cross training. That's kind of been my basis, so to speak. People talk about their foundation style. My foundation style really is cross training. It's quite unusual in that sort of respect. But so I needed to record a lot of information. So I was doing that, and it became sort of like part of the discipline, so to speak. If you know what I mean. So it was like, I record that. I want to get that back in there, and it. So I was recording these. And then when I started teaching, I thought, well, I might as well record what I'm teaching as well. And then as time went on, and I started to think, you know what? Well, I've got a website, I've got a blog. Why don't I make some of these diary entries public? Why don't I just, it's going to help my students. I don't have to mention anyone by name. We can just talk about the content of the material that we're covering. And that's exactly what I did, and that became it. And then, so obviously, when I moved out of running the club and I had private clients, this became part of the whole service. And it also helped my other clients. Then they could read it through their social media and get a connection there, and also it could reach out to people such as yourself and could see what I'm doing, and I'd get good feedback from other people, and it's all it became like all part of the process, so to speak. So that developed. I mean, the actual writing itself. I've got a passion for writing, full stop. That didn't just develop from me just writing the diaries or writing the things like that. I love writing.
Oh yeah, I can hear you okay. And so one of the things I noticed in your writing is that you could tell that you practice the skill of it. That was something that got my attention, because just as much as we had talked about earlier, if you're a martial arts instructor, you want to kind of learn how to take your craft and meet people out. One of the biggest things, though, that most independent martial artists, having people to be able to find you, requires that you have to have a voice of some kind. My voice, I practiced, and it just so happens I found what I felt like was a comfortable niche, using microphones and systems and being able to communicate through my voice different things. But when I saw your writings on the blog, and then when I read a couple of your books, the first thing that jumped out to me is going, he's practiced the skill of writing. Ian Abernathy has his own skills. He's great at certain instructional videos. He's got his own type of voice and things like that he does very well. That's one of the things I think a lot of times martial arts instructors, for example, will overlook. They won't put an emphasis on creating a voice of whatever they're most comfortable with, as much as, like you said, you love your writing as much as you do your martial arts.
Yeah, it's funny you should say that, because that brings us on to, you talk about playing to one's strengths. Writing is one of the best ways, and I realized, I thought, of all the things that I can do, that's the one thing I know I can use as a medium to get across to people, and that's the one thing I know I can really do. I'm starting to get to grips with videos and obviously the podcasting and all that kind of thing. I'm learning all that. I'm burgeoning on all that side of it. I'm on a very steep learning curve with all of that kind of material. But writing was always my, as I said, it was always my thing. I mean, if that was the one thing I could nail down when I was at school, it was writing. And before that, it was storytelling. We were on the circus. Everyone used to love telling, verbal, stories. It would be and all that kind of thing. So I suppose it probably was a natural progression out of that. But on that subject of playing to a person's strengths, This is what I try to do when I work with my clients. This is why I love private lessons. This is why, I mean, a lot of martial arts teachers really don't like private lessons. I don't think they're always that comfortable with that kind of environment for some reason or other. And that's a topic, in itself. But what I try to do when I'm working with a client is, understanding what their occupation is, understanding what their passion is alongside martial arts, because this is what makes martial artists often interesting. What I find makes a very interesting martial artist is not just their interest in the martial arts, it's what is outside of their martial arts. What is that part of it? How does that, that's when you really start finding it. Because if all your interest is purely martial arts, it kind of works against itself in a way, in a sort of, you become insular, you become very much, and then you're being informed by martial artists. Your writing is being informed by martial artists, and it goes down. It can deteriorate. Whereas if you look at all the great pioneers in the martial arts world, they did other things, and those other things then gave the flavor to the martial arts. They gave it another dimension, and they put it in another way, and they progressed the training, and their students benefited from that progressive training. Now for me, part of my CSI approach, clarification, skepticism, individuality, when I get to the individuality part of it, when I'm putting the person at the center, rather than trying to find a different teaching method, which is, as we know, is a fallacy. You can't, this idea that you have to use a different teaching method for every different student, it's nonsense. It's not productive. It hasn't stood up to scrutiny or any sort of peer-reviewed, research. It's very much it's a wish fulfillment sort of thing with who have taken that kind of individualism, too far, in my mind anyway, in my view, and also what the data is showing us. But when I talk about individuality and actually putting the student at the center of what they do with their teaching, part of that is making an attachment to their other passions, the other things that they really, really like. So I've got, one of my clients is a carpenter. So, we'll stop and we'll look at either actions that illustrate, very, very, very crude, very literal sort of, muscle memory points of view. I mean, almost getting into Karate Kid territory here, if you know what I mean. But like, the soaring action and the right cross, you know what I mean. For example, it's quite a simple, way to look at it. Especially if you start looking at repetitive, right crosses when you're teaching it from very much a self-defense perspective. Where you just like teaching someone to hammer in that straight rear hand again and again and again. It's like a soaring action. But also when you start talking about structures, when we're talking about angles, strength of structure, when you're doing something like a cover or something like that, all these things, when you start talking to them and explain, and he then can explain back to me, how this works in carpentry. So I might have like some misconception about carpentry. I don't know anything about carpentry. I'm not a very good DIY guy at all. I'm the worst person to come to on that side. Let's get that completely straight. When I told you I'm a man of limited skills, that wasn't false, but modesty. You know what I mean? So, the chimera in my symbol isn't just for multi-style; it's for chaos too. I'll struggle in a way to try and find a way of connection with carpentry, and then he'll start explaining to me the thing to come. That's where the magic happens. You start like, oh no, this is and he'll explain all these different things about carpentry, and I'll be listening to that. And then I'll just, and then he'll start making the connection himself. And it's not me going, well, what you see, you've just explained this to me. And I get revelations. That's not the magic. The magic is when he starts going, this is the fulcrum. This is the, this is the structure. This is the part of it. And you can see it. This is where the joint lock really works. This is how positioning works and all this kind of thing. And, and you've got other ones, they've got, with a vast variety of different backgrounds and ideas and it's great when you find those things, because they are they can be played to your strength, and you can it's not just using your, as an instructor it's great, like writing. I've found that as being my way. I thought I'll just keep writing because I know that's my one thing that I know I can do well, in order to get across there, or to a certain degree.
Well, I want to capture that for just a second, because one of the things, irregardless, I tell my son, if there's only one skill in writing that he must really consider mastering as he grows into an adult, is the ability to tell a story, a short story. Every resume you write, every introduction you make, anything that you ever do in your life is going to begin usually with a short story. And if you're planning to capture anyone's attention, no matter which voice you use, whether it's a personal voice, the inflections of your voice, whether you're writing grammatical type of effect like you have. When I read your writing, it's almost like you're describing, I could be there envisioning it. Everybody has their own voice, but that ability to tell a story is a skill that you can't minimize the importance in the ability to tell a story.
No, and again, this is often the most memorable teachers are often the ones who do tell the stories, don't they? I mean, this is often the thing when you hear back, and this is what you're finding. I'm fascinated with all the scholarly research that you've been done on the historical literature. I mean, that's really proving to be very, very important for some of my research in the Bullshitsu series of books, so to speak, because it's great because of course it's all there. You know what I mean? It's in the primary source material, we're seeing it in the training manuals, and we're getting these wonderful academics that are just piecing together so much information and debunking all the myths and all that side of it all. And you look back at that, but you also find that I'm often, especially when I promote things like critical thinking and skepticism, to most people, that's like announcing that you're a party pooper, right? You know what I mean? It's like saying, you know what I mean? It's like, oh, shit. And there's mad conversations I have, and I'm an easygoing sort of guy. I'm a laid back sort of guy. I mean, maybe I'm passive even to a certain degree. And I'll be there chatting away, and and I have a live and let live attitude for most of it. I'm not that, I become an agent provocateur, but I select my battles, if you know what I mean. Most of the time in the social setting, I don't like to ruin the dinner party. Do you know what I mean? But it's when somebody then kind of goes, so Jamie, what do you really think about electromagnetic fields being used by people? And the look on my face, and everyone's going, oh crap.
Right.
I'm going, do you really want to know?
We had to go there. I used to have this motto in my early 20s, and it basically went something. It's very simple. Don't ask me questions that you really don't want me to answer.
Yeah, exactly.
Well, one, I appreciate your compliment there about the historical research. I got to tell you, that in itself was an exercise that I had gone through probably about, I want to say, several years before I even started the podcast. And Ian was the one who was a catalyst for me to start the podcast. And he didn't do it directly. He did it indirectly. And that was an interesting piece unto itself. But the idea that I was trying to take all this academic research into somehow, as much as I could, redigest it into a way that made sense. I mean, a lot of times when you read academic literature, it is very dry. It's very just dot, dash, right?
yeah, absolutely. And it is hard work, and you achieve that really, really well. I mean, certainly by the way that you format your shows, and also when you just stop and you just go, okay, now this is what he's trying to say, or this is what is coming apart. And the fact is that when I first started listening to Kung Fu podcasts, I mean, it had a straight away the hook on it. I can see what you're going for there. That's a really, really effective title, but it's kind of like okay, I've got one or two books in my collection, and as I say, I'm an omnivorous collector of books. But amongst those books, you've got a few of them that you think are just airport, pop psychology or pulp nonfiction. That's a great term that you see turning up, and actually they're not. They're actually, the title is sensationalist, but it doesn't do justice to the content, if you know what I mean. It's a wonderful hook. This is something that Jeff Thompson told me about years ago. He sometimes said, it doesn't matter what the bait is and what the hook is, and that as long as you get them in there, and then you can then unpack your important story. And this is what I have to tell with Kung Fu Podcast. If you look at Kung Fu Podcast, I'm going to go, I didn't know about you. I mean, obviously, I've seen the recommendations from Ian, and I've seen that connection there, and then I think we may have had one or two comments online on Twitter, and I was going, yeah, this is good. And I listened to one, and I was about, and you were explaining a few things, and I started listening to all the, like the new scientific research that you were bringing up about certain things, and I was going, oh my god, this is one of us, so to speak. I was going, oh god, for that I was expecting to hear someone talking about chi masters and and electromagnetic fields and all that sort of thing. I thought, oh no.
You hit something there. I have actually struggled, and I've spoke with Ian about this, and I've spoke to Dr. Ben Junkins about this. There's been a few times, and I still maintain a domain collection of names. I have oftentimes thought about changing the name of Kung Fu Podcast to Martial Arts Podcast, or I don't know. Martial Arts Podcast was actually the one I was planning to go with.
Sure.
But then, Dr. Junkins, he just said, Tim, he said, my blog is called Kung Fu Tea. And every version of martial artist comes to my blog every month. He said, once they get the name and they get the message, they'll come no matter what the title of it is. And I've just kind of stuck with it.
I think it's doing well, and I think I quite like the fact that it's almost it's a bit of understanding. It isn't you could. It could be. I mean, okay, martial arts podcast, maybe that works. But again, the Kung Fu's again got that. It's a bit of almost got a fun kind of sort of thing to it. So it's not intimidating to necessarily to a person. But straight away, obviously you get a lot of people who don't study Chinese martial arts. They might suddenly stop and think, that's not my kind of thing. I'm not into Kung Fu and it's not my sort of stuff like that. But it's I mean, that's the only thing that I would think that would do that. But it's a very generic term. I mean, again, the word Kung Fu, for many years has been a name for a type of martial arts action film, hasn't it? Not just Chinese martial arts action film. People say Kung Fu. I mean, let's get a Kung Fu film out, or Kung Fu. I just remember in our video library back in the days when they had video libraries. They'd have the Kung Fu section. Do you know what I mean? The Kung Fu section wouldn't have exclusively Chinese martial arts movies. It would be a mixture of any sort of film that fitted within the martial arts action genre. So I think it's a great hook. I think it's and really nice branding as well. And I just like the way it sort of hooks people in, and you're giving them the insight. There's that nice sort of that balance that you get there, where you're getting actually good scholarly. I mean, there's some great stuff that you've got up there that you've reproduced, where you've had lectures, that you've put up there too, and it's surprisingly just how you just get pulled into that, and it's just without being too much dry, too dry and too oppressive in that. And I said, some of the best books I've read, I'll have to, make no bones about it. Some of the best books I've read often are those that, give the impression, one I'm reading at the moment that's providing to be a bit of research for my wearable trilogy of podcasts at the moment. Is a book by Kevin Dutton called The Wisdom of Psychopaths. And you look at the front cover, it's bright pink, and it's called The Wisdom of Psych. I bought it in an airport. There you go. So straight away, it gives you the impression, this is going to be pop psychology, right? This is going to be, and it's actually really well researched. It's proper, it's really, really well researched. It's constantly, it's working on. It's all the papers are cited there. This is proper. It's written by a professor of a university. He doesn't call himself Dr. Kevin Dutton, but that's what he is. He's a professor at a university. So, and it's all that, and he's working with other professors, with other people who work directly with psychopaths, and it's, I was expecting it to be some, I don't know, sort of some fun sort of self-help book that I often read for, probably a masochistic side of my personality, just so I can just go, oh, for God's sake, this is awful, I like bad movies as well, so I've got that kind of side to me, But it was really surprised, and it's a really, really well written book, and I'm going, okay, that'll teach me to be a snob. You know what I mean?
well, I made a couple notes here. First is that when I first started the name Kung Fu Podcast, I actually started it from the way it was taught with me, which is basically in my mind didn't have as much to do with Chinese martial arts as it just simply did about the pursuit of excellence throughout martial arts. That's where that name started with. And that you already answered one question I had, which was what you're currently reading. And I wanted to tell you that basically I'm in the middle. I'm doing a book review for John Bluestein's book, The Martial Arts Teacher, which is it's a good read. He's done a good job. I'm not going to, no spoiler alerts are going to be necessary, but he's done a good job in doing some research on some different areas. He's got a Chinese background, Chinese martial arts background, and has some cultural components to it. But interestingly enough, it's not about how to teach martial arts as much as it is here's some ideas about what a martial arts teacher could incorporate or consider when they're training and doing some other things. So I'm looking forward to sharing that. He's been on me for a while about trying to get it read, and to be honest with you, I have not been slowing down at all. I've just been trying to organize my thoughts.
I don't know. Are you the kind of person that has several books though on the go? Because I am. I often have about 3 or 4 books, all with bookmarkers in different places. I mean, maybe that's a reflection of my primary cross training, but are you that?
Well, interesting. I have a couple of books that I call just basically pick up and think on. Right. So I have like the Tibetan Book of Living and Dying, and that's one of those books I don't progressively read. I just pick up. Whatever page I open it up to, that's the page I'll consider for the next, week or so during my thoughts. Another book that's like that is the 48 Laws of Power.
Right.
And that's another one of those books where you just flip over, it tells you a great story where somebody did the right thing or they didn't do the right thing, and that's the type of thing. But when it comes to some of the other martial arts books, I'm reading academic essays all the time. The thing I struggle with is that I didn't have the language muscle. I mean, I had never. I'm from an exercise physiology background, so when you're talking biomechanics or forces and velocities and power, as far as the human body is concerned, that's what I did my graduate work in. I'm very comfortable with that. When you start talking about anthropology, sociology, political science, and all this other stuff, and they use language in terms like a lawyer does. That then specific to their field, I'm sitting there going, I have no idea what that is. I spent more time looking up words, trying to figure out what the word meant so that I could somehow translate it to something that would mean something to me. Which I've
often got that. I've often got a book there and a dictionary right next door to me. Yes. Exactly. I make no bomb. I mean, for a person who enjoys writing and loves language. I mean, I love English language. I'm embarrassed to admit my language outside of English is terrible. But even in English language, I'm forever discovering either new words or phrases or something that I'm unfamiliar with and that kind of thing. And it's funny how what we do, I often feel that it drives you to learn new skills, new knowledge, because you find out how much that we're doing is, the scope. It's important to explore that scope, and that really is where you get that, that progress. It's funny you should say that about. You see, I was never scientifically minded. This is the point I made when I did my interview with Ian Abernethy. The godfather of martial arts podcasts, as he shall be known. Talking to you, we're all Ian's children, aren't we? Really? He's now got he spread his podcast seeds far and wide, and there's this huge community now of martial arts podcasters, for good or for bad. So he'll either be revered as the great podcaster godfather, or the demise of martial arts. Or, I don't know whichever. But it's down to us. We get to when things then become to like get scientifically minded. And I explained this to Ian. I said, I'm a romantic at heart. This is just it, because it's interesting how you picked up on with my writing. You said that, you're interested in, how writing was such a big part of what I did. Well, I wasn't a rational minded, scientifically minded person. A lot of people, they see some of the stuff that I push. I always say I'm a cheerleader for science. I'm not a scientist. I'm not, my maths is terrible. I have to go through to my daughter's in primary school at the moment, and I'm having to relearn a lot of stuff. When she's going through her homework, which has been fine for me, but it's quite embarrassing at times. But I'm not naturally inclined towards science. It's something that that along the way, between martial arts and other areas in my life, I suddenly realized, you're going to have to start learning this. You're going to have to start understanding this, because, you have to make separations. Storytelling is a wonderful, wonderful way to convey ideas, particularly abstract ideas, ideas that people can't, if you want people to relate to things, then sometimes you have to use an abstract concept. This is why, fables have endured. This is why parables have endured, and why the fictional story. Sometimes there's so much you can get out of a fictional story. It's and you see this in the arts, don't you? You can watch maybe like 5 or 6 documentaries that are really, really good, really informative, really, really, really good, and then you get to see like a fictional reconstruction, shall we say, or a program that's been inspired, a film or a TV show or something like that. It's been inspired by real events, and that's the one that really touches you. You know what I mean? Out of all of them, because the actors, because the art and the rhythm and it's so it's good for using that as abstract method. With you having to change, your disciplines, where you're, you've got your biomechanics background, you've got your physiological sort of background, and now suddenly you're having to get into more into the psychological, the neuroscience, the sociology, the political, which again, and it all has a relevance in martial arts.
Sure.
People would often think, what does political science got to do with martial arts? Well, loads. In fact, it shaped entire, the institution of martial arts. Political science has. There's no doubt about it. A lot of things that people wrongly interpret as being traditional martial art is shaped by political science. It's shaped by certain drivers, that we have in society. And so you have to force it. So the same thing with me. I had to embrace even if I didn't completely understand the science, even if I didn't, wasn't ever going to be scientifically minded or mathematically minded, I had to respect the scientific method. And this was kind of the thing that I noticed was missing. So you'd find martial artists who, again, would have maybe a good grasp of, physical science, so to speak. And they'd use a lot of science to explain why their system was great and why it was better than others. But they weren't following the scientific method. Do you know what I mean? So it was science there. And this was kind of thing I was kind of, because it's a difference between, having science within your service, within your product, within your art, but it's no good if what you're doing isn't actually guided by the scientific method, and that's where it's falling apart. And that's where what you're doing there is you're teaching an ideology now. Then you're teaching, you can argue you're teaching an art. There's no problem with that. But the arts and science, they don't always, they're often at very different ends of the spectrum. I mean, there's plenty of talk we can talk about overlap, but in general broad terms, unless you're an architect, you tend to be, on one side or the other. This is what tends to happen with people. And I'm very much I've been on the art side. But somewhere along the line, especially, I think it's because it was the reality-based stuff. It was because I was getting, the real side of it. I'd got to the stage when I'd stopped becoming a performer, and I was then saying, look, I really want my training to, to actually, be what it was there for in the first place. And that's when I, it came across the whole reality-based movement. I got into that quite heavily and made some great friends and had some good teachers. But as I was doing that, I was kind of like, okay, how far does this go? And then, with the whole sort of pragmatism, it wasn't long before I started realizing, well, in philosophical terms, what we're looking at here is critical thinking. And so I started looking at critical thinking, and I started, understanding that, on a formal basis at least, and the whole skeptical movement and so on. And then I shone a light on it, and I started to go, oh my God, the reality-based world is just as guilty as committing the crimes as all the other tribes in martial arts are. It's just as guilty as the traditionalists, just as guilty as the people in the sports world. Which have all got, they're all wonderful, and and I've never come to be fitted in any of those three camps. If I had to divide the martial arts world up, and I know there's overlap between them all: sports, traditionalism, and self-defense. Reality-based self-defense. Culture-wise, I'm talking about here. They all often, leave the scientific method. Do you know what I mean? They often leave that sea, and they leave critical thinking, and that's when you start seeing it. That's when you start saying, oh, this is where we've got the problems. This is often where you keep seeing all the this is actually where the criticism will come from other people often, because because this is what's happened, and it's that kind of led me to doing that, but I had to sort of step outside of my own comfort zone. I was hearing all the time martial arts preaching about comfort zones. You step outside your comfort zone to get stronger. You step outside your comfort zone to get familiar with contact training, resistance-based training, pressure testing, all that kind of thing. But then also you've got to step outside your comfort zone in terms of what you're teaching. And this is interesting, because this brings me back to what you just said about your colleague who's lent you his first draft of book on teaching. We haven't got enough books like that in the martial arts world, I'd have to say.
No, I was just thinking that what you just said there is part of the reason, as you and I are talking, I'm trying to convey to the martial arts teachers, whether you're listening to this particular program and you're not a teacher at this point, or like for myself, I never aspired to be a teacher. I was never interested in teaching. I had so much to work on. Teaching was just so far beyond the horizon. And then one day I needed a place to practice, and all of a sudden I'm becoming a teacher. My teacher had encouraged me to teach, but it wasn't something I was interested in at the time. But as we're moving forward with this, one of the things that you brought up is something that Confucius would often talk about is, learning how to, when you're studying something, your curiosity will lead you into extending the knowledge. That you learn something, but to learn it even deeper, you have to extend your knowledge into another area in order to come into a different perspective or terms with it. Which leads me to a question for you. If you were going to define what you think of as martial arts, how would you put that in writing in, let's say, a sentence or two?
Yeah, that is often, that's the question. I've seen it pop up on your podcast a couple of times now about, what are we talking about define, what in what context are we defining martial? I've heard you say this a few times on your podcast.
Sure, because it's always important if I'm going to have a conversation. Just real quickly, Dr. Ben Juckins, the first time I ever spoke with him, and he and I were writing, every time I write with him, the first thing he does to me is he'll say, Tim, I need you to define what it means you mean by. And so what turned out to be a one-sentence question ends up being a 3-paragraph correspondence because I haven't defined well enough, and he won't talk with me unless I've defined the parameters to which we were discussing. It's a wonderful exercise.
Yeah, it is a wonderful exercise, and that's the trouble. And I think martial arts are all about context. I mean, to try to think of an actual sentence to do that, it is hard because my definition of martial arts. Yeah,
yeah. I'm gonna give you 2 or 3 sentences because I had this conversation earlier today with a student in a lesson today, which was based on the previous podcast. Was like, for example, they came up and he was saying, well, when we're in dance, and I've taken a lot of the things I learned in the martial arts, and he said that he had translated that into some of his dance and things along those lines, and this is how he, interprets it. And I reminded him, I said, look, this is excellent. I said, but as long as you're practicing martial arts here, I want you to. We need to make sure that we have some definitions that we're operating with today. We may sit down and talk about it, but for right now, here's how we're going to base this. So that's why I wanted to hear what your definition of how you might try to define it today.
Yeah, it would be as I say, the difficulty is, as I said, it is contextual because every time I've seen a definition of martial arts, I've gone the term. I think. I've seen 2 origins for the term. One was in relation, funnily enough, to I think do with battleships, and then the other something connected to Bushido when people were trying to derive it from the term Bushido. That's the earliest sort of like. I'd have to have a look back on that again. And I also start one of my essays. I can't remember which one it was, but I start one of my essays with this problem with defining what is a martial art. And one of the things that threw people a curveball on because. I'm mischievous like that. I said, Oscar Wilde said, all art is useless. So where does that leave martial arts?
Right. Well,
when I use the term martial arts, I am incredibly generic with it. I have to say, I am not. It's one of the rare cases when I am not a stitch counter. I'm not a bean counter. When it comes to that with martial arts, because I see too many exceptions to the rule. Somebody will say to you, someone will say to you, okay, well, it's a military art. It's got to be an art that's been practiced by the military. And I go, well, that's rubbish because, any art, can end up in the military. It can be part of the, it can be, you can have a pool or, snooker club in the military. Do you know what I mean? Does that make it a martial art? It's practiced, but you've got the armies, the armies versus the Navy, having a darts championship. We might have if you look at football, both American and British soccer, they both stem from a martial art. They stem. You don't get more martial than 2 tribes going at it beating the hell out of each other to get hold of a spherical object.
Yeah,
And that is the basis of it.
Right.
And that's where it comes from. That's the root of it. And even to this day, you've got countries like Italy and Russia who are going back to the roots of those sports. And if you look at Australian rules football as well, I mean, that the martial side of it is definitely very much in there. We have it, and rugby and all that sort of thing. It's a real slippery thing. I mean, for me, it's any combat system. It is virtually, to me, I'll throw that net wide. Any combat system. And if somebody says, well, okay, so is Taibo a martial art? This is the thing. And I'm going, well, in some ways it is. It's derived from it's combat systems. It's derived from. You could say it's a discipline derived from a combat art, but I would still, well, the movements, like that,
right, right.
But what about Tulu, the wushu forms, right. Competitive wushu forms, that they've lost virtually all combative application in terms of that, unashamedly so. Musical forms that you see, they're completely, they've lost all their combative application, most of it anyway.
Well, it is interesting because everything you said I could absolutely get on board with. And when I am generally teaching, I'm very clear about defining, I'm teaching movements right now. I'll teach the actions later, right? And when I get into the actions, now we're going to be working at, basically when I define martial arts from when I'm teaching one-on-one, it's usually what I describe as objective ended. So there's an objective at the end of this, and that it's action oriented. So that we're going to be, we're going to be trying to achieve. I have four objectives that I'm usually trying to achieve, and I'm going to use all of these means, which could be kicking, striking, punching, biting, tripping, sweeping, whatever, to get to that objective.
Right. Okay. Well, I would come in with you on that one and say yes. I would say then in that case, the defining thing is not by giving exemplifications of different martial arts, but probably by intention. What is the intention behind the training? Because you could say, okay, so let me give you an example. Okay, so I could say a boxercise class, right? Okay, let's say a boxercise class. Is that a martial art? Now, a lot of martial artists will definitely come back. And of course, it's not a martial art. Why? Because they're just doing it for fitness. They're just doing, it's a form of aerobics that happens to our boxing movements. Which is just, boxercise is the equivalent of Taibo. So it's the same thing. You go, okay, that's fine. Okay, so why isn't it? Because they, they'll be punched in the air. Some boxercise classes punch pads. A lot of them do. They make it part of their whole thing. Well, what they don't do, the one thing they don't do is they don't spar. Okay, right. So, okay, that's the one thing they don't do. They don't spar. Okay, you'll go, okay, well, they've got lots of calisthenic movements. Well, so does boxing. Okay, so everything, the defining common thing here is they don't spar. So you go, okay, right, so they don't spar. So you're telling me that if there's no sparring in your martial art, then therefore it ceases to be a martial art, right? That's okay, right? So we're going to chuck Aikido out unless it's Tomokai Aikido. We're going to chuck there's a whole bunch of martial arts. We can chuck Tai Chi out, unless they do engage in push hands sort of training. Do you know what I mean? There's a whole host of Aiudo that can go right out the window, can't it? You know what I mean? There's loads of Aikido. They're not even supposed to be competitive, really. There's a whole list of martial disciplines that you can go on and say, okay, it doesn't have sparring in it. So, and I think most people would say, bear in mind, I'm coming from a point of view that, as you know, I'm very, very, very pro sparring, very, very pro pressure testing. I mean, that's my preference. That's my preference. That's my bias. That's my own arguments. But we're talking about in terms of definition of martial art. It has to be intention. I think that's probably the one thing. I would say it's intention. So and if somebody's going to be really awkward about it, then I go and say, yeah, I'm willing to say a signal operator in the military is practicing a martial art. If his intention is to use that for a combative exercise, so be it. That's a martial art. I'm willing to go that far. Yeah.
Well, and that's kind of where I'm at. That's and I'm open to other concepts, and and I have a big sports background, and I've just recently been asked to be a high school assistant wrestling coach. I just spent this past weekend being a leadership instructor through a challenge for a football team. So my background in sports, and generally the way I interpret it is that I use my sports background as developing the skills that help me utilize my martial arts. So, I look at football as being, being collision oriented, and being able to handle more than one thing at one time because, I played offensive line, I played linebacker. If I ever focused on one player on that other team, I usually got crushed, right? Because, it's 11 guys on that side, not one, right? And there's only one objective, and that's to bring that guy with the ball down. So, and everybody on the other side is trying to take you out in the process. So,
it's funny actually because I've trained a lot of my students. Actually, funny enough, I had a disproportionate number of clients and students who have been either current or ex rugby players. Obviously, rugby.
Same sort of way.
Same route as American football, same thing, over here, by the way, as you know, over here we always call American football because if you say soccer over here, people do say soccer over here, but it's not as, it's football's the prevalent term that we use for football, so we often say American to push it. But essentially, to the British, when they see American football, they associate it more closely with rugby, our sport.
Yeah, I can see that for sure.
Yeah. Despite the fact there's Australian football as well, which again it's a similar, a closer relationship, I would say, those three, as opposed to soccer, which is football, soccer. But because this is and again, I'm very much into attribute training as well. So
absolutely beautiful.
Attributes. Yeah, absolutely. Go into something, and there's a whole discussion on that. In terms of attribute training, people don't realize that actually self-defense techniques have been improved and developed, but only by research into combat sports. And how does that work out? People would think, well, can't people learn that through street fighting years and years? No, absolutely not. You actually, in an environment where you do have rules, where you do have restrictions, you end up developing certain skills that then can be adapted and transferred and used to improve. So that's another area altogether. But back to the point here. Now, when you look at football or rugby, you see a sport where, as you say, you've got your whole objective is to take the guy down. Well, the objective of the guy with the ball is to escape, and he's up against multiple opponents who are trying to take him down, and he can use defensive techniques to stop them, right? To push them away, to maneuver out the way, to palm them away, to all this kind of thing in order to get to the finish line. Now, in the beginning of my classes, especially when I'm teaching self-defense, specifically self-defense, we learn tactical escape. It's almost identical. How is that not a martial art in terms of that? And you've got a whole martial art that its root, like parkour, which now is free running, and everyone sees it as a very much an acrobatic exercise and activity. But its origins is supposedly a French martial arts system of escape. And this is the most important thing that we teach people in self-protection. You know what I mean? And when you teach people self-defense, and even right down to the actual hard skills of self-defense. When I'm teaching kids self-defense, I teach children. I make it as realistic as possible, and that's one of my things that I'm known for. Obviously, it's teaching realistic self-defense techniques to children. And the first thing we learn is evasion exercises. A huge portion of their training is all about escaping. And even when they're actually learning fighting techniques, the fighting techniques always end with access the exit point. This is a kind of thing like that. And, and often even when I'm teaching adults, it's the same thing, access the exit point, find the exit point, unless they're doing control and restraint. That's what I'm teaching them. I'm teaching them, because sometimes also teaching people how to turn the switch. You'll impact a pad, a focus mid pad, or in a pressure test situation, they've also got to understand when it's time to now get out, to disengage. You know what I mean? To where they've proportionate force to get out of a situation, but now now it's time to, and you can replicate that on a focus mitt drill where where they can keep striking the target. You want them to repetitively strike the target as often as possible with maximum force. But once that target goes down, once that target is covered, they need to be able to switch off and get to the exit point, not to keep going. You know what I mean?
And that's a hard thing to get people who, it's like once they turn the switch on, it's hard to get them to flicker it back.
Yeah, which brings me straight onto something that I love teaching, and it's very much a cornerstone of all of the things I do in my seminars, which is something I call the switch. For that reason, I call it the switch. And I make people do various exercises where they learn to disengage at different, and you have to set different times. Like this is going to take 10 shots, and this is going to take 3 shots, strike wise. Or the actual switch itself is an exercise which switches between sport and counter assault situation. So whether you're on the focus mitts or whether you're with a training partner, it's changing that dynamic. Because again, one of the arguments that I've had, in the martial arts world is then people have gone and said, what's the difference between sport and self-defense? And I go, well, self-defense can learn a hell of a lot from sport. Let's get that completely straight. I'm not going to, I'm not going to make any bones about this. I'm definitely not of that. I came my reality-based self-defense, if you want to use that, the tribal term for that, was born of martial artists who actually very much went into combat sports to help reintroduce effective training methods for self-defense. They came up with the likes of Jeff Thompson.
Sure.
They then went off and got wrestling and boxing and judo coaching qualifications, and then brought that back in. And so this isn't from a world where there are people who've done traditional martial arts and then worked security or worked in the military and then said, okay, what's informing what we do? Which is often the path you see. These are people who did they worked doors, they worked security, but they got a lot of their attribute training, so to speak, from that side of it. So so I'm very, very pro combat sports as a form of attribute training or for self-defense training.
If you're listening to the program, to find Jamie's stuff, you can look up Clubb Chimera, Chimera, virtually on any of the social media and be moved over toward his lessons, his essays, his books. I highly recommend his books for self-defense of children. Really can open your eyes to, he uses the phrase pressure testing and several other components. I would highly recommend it. Find him on Twitter, Facebook, Amazon here in the United States as well. But Jamie, we started this program. I have to get ready to go down. I have another lesson, but I wanted to kind of review a couple of things that I've written down here for us today. And
sure.
Would you like to come back onto the program again another time? I'd love to have you if you're willing to come back.
I would be very, very happy to come back on the program. It's a real pleasure.
Because I feel like you and I are leaving. You and I could have some really good conversations.
Definitely.
And dig into a few of these topics. But the first things is that if you're a martial arts instructor, gather yourself in a way to be able to meet people in different places, be able to train in a facility, be able to train outside. You're going to have your own preference, but so are your clients. And being able to be versatile is going to be a big part of your early success. Finding a voice. Jamie's primary voice that got my attention was his ability to write and his ability to tell the stories. You can follow his lessons plans. Even though you don't know who that student is that he's writing about, you can tell what that student did in that lesson and how they're improving across that process. It's a very important skill to be able to develop a voice of some kind, whether that's through videos or Ando Mirzwa has an excellent voice in what he does. Jamie, the other thing you mentioned was about the ability to tell stories metaphorically relating to the individual, like the carpenter, and being able to transfer teachings and attributes to them through something that they're already familiar with.
Yes. Yeah.
Yeah. And then also, if you're planning to learn anything else and develop, like I had to develop a basis of sociology and anthropology and things like that, then you have to be prepared, like Jamie has described it, what he has done in his writing, to extend your knowledge further than the martial arts. You've got to dig into something and get a academic understanding of what it is you're trying to understand. And where we were kind of finishing off here, which I would love to talk with you more about, is an operating definition, if you need one. But in my mind, you do have to have something of what martial arts is to you today. For some people, they have a very traditional approach. It doesn't include weapon. For some people, it never includes sports. And I'm totally on board, as Jamie was saying, is that sports has its place, and you can learn a hell of a lot. If you ever played football, if you ever played, like for me, I was a big wrestler. I wrestled for a lot of years. And when I got into Tai Chi Chuan, I'm like, this is just wrestling from a different country. I mean, I'm right at home.
I have to say, TW, the wrestling of all the, I didn't spend a lot of time in wrestling, but I found it the most terrifying of all physical activities that is, and that includes MMA training, that includes no holds barred self-defense training, and that's the thing about people talk about restrictions, when you've got restrictions, you've got more rules, it makes it less dangerous. Nonsense. When you're suddenly within an environment where you can't roll onto your back, to grapple, when you're in an environment where everything is all about staying on your feet, stopping people from and the amount of things that would be considered like in jiu-jitsu that I was doing, like Brazilian jiu-jitsu at the time that I was doing, but considered to be negative in wrestling, and it became terrifying. It's going, everything about this is all about one of us throwing the other right up into the air, and it's all making sure that there's no escape out of that. So it's I have to say that out of all my experiences, I say a huge respect to wrestlers, because it was the scariest of all the combat activities that I've done.
Well, and it's certainly one of those things that I think you said beautifully. In order to ever let anything go, you have to first hold it. You can't let go of something that you never really possess. And to possess something, you have to cup your hands, for example. You have to be able to grasp it. And so when you set up rules, for example, for boxing, or you set up rules for football, or you set up rules for rugby or whatever it is, you're setting a form that we're going to participate. We're going to hold this particular athletic endeavor and this competitive endeavor in this manner. And then eventually you get the attributes from that, and then you let it go, and it becomes a flourishing part of your martial arts.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, one of the people who taught me, one of Jeff Thompson's instructors, Matty Evans, used to love the expression "learn the rules before you learn how to break the rules," and I thought that very much encapsulates a lot of cross training perspective. You learn the rules first before you learn how to break them.
Absolutely, because you can't learn to let them go until you embrace them a little bit, and then you know what the unrestricted means. And then for me, that actually helps me a lot. Like you were saying, for folks, when it becomes objective oriented, there's some rules here. You have to meet an objective. But I've got to run downstairs. I can't wait to talk with you again.
Cool. No problem at all. I look forward to it.
Yes, sir. Thank you again.
There was a lot of really good information in that particular episode. If you are a teacher or an aspiring one day to be a teacher, having versatility can give you opportunities to creating a bigger body of business, meeting people in different places, learning how to find a voice for yourself. You don't have to do what Jamie does. You don't have to do what I do. You don't have to do what Ian Abernathy does. But you do have to find a way to create a voice that means something to you, and really learn to try to be really good at that one voice. After you've got that one voice down, then you can expand off into other areas. I encourage you to spread your message by marketing and with less advertisement. Get out there, meet people, see what you can do for people right around your corner, and that will help you just as much as anything that you can possibly do in the many years to come. You can be looking for the review on Mr. John Bluestein's book, The Martial Arts Teacher, coming out here soon. And I want to ask you to remember, try to set aside some time each and every day to practice a little reading and a little storytelling. It'll make a big difference in the many years to come. If you'd like to support this program, get weekly updates and access to the full 300 and some odd pieces of content that's in the library, all you have to do is go over to patreon.com/TW Smith, and you can sign up right there and get everything you want. Have a great practice today, and I look forward to talking to you again real soon.